human communication is contextual and depends on, in addition to verbal content, body language, facial expressions, how you move your hands and arms, and the way you hold yourself. So, for example, the old guy here might be telling the viewer, "If you do that one more time." Tone of voice is another way we communicate. "Oh, that's awesome!" and "Oh, that's awesome" mean two very different things. The first is genuinely a good thing, the second is not. About 90% of communication is nonverbal, the study of which is called paralinguistics. We'll be taking a brief look at emoticon use in interpersonal communication online, their use in communicating a group's culture, and pose law, which will be explained later. Communication online is usually textual in places like blogs, forums, and comment sections. By itself, that leaves lots of room for miscommunication. For example, how many ways could you interpret that quote? Is it being sincere or sarcastic? By itself, you can't tell. So how do you remedy this? You use emoticons. Having a definition of these might be a good place to start. From Chris Mann and Fiona Stewart's book, Internet Communication and Qualitative Research, a handbook for researching online. Emoticons are a form of electronic paralanguage which are used to show affect and establish relational tone. They may also include verbal descriptions of feelings and sounds. For example, big hugs. Smileys are perhaps the most used of all emoticons. These indicate that a textual comment should be taken with a smile and not too seriously. It may be a joke or friendly insult. Emoticons make communication online richer and a little bit more like face-to-face contact. And I'm going to expand on that definition to include images like the one in the opening slide, which may include text. Let's look at a couple of examples, starting with, "We would love to hear from you." It looks sincere enough. Now it's sarcasm. Calling the reader's sister a nerd might be considered offensive, but the smile indicates that it was said affectionately, and it should not be taken seriously. Being called a jerk is generally a bad thing, but the smiley, again, changes the tone, making it more of an affectionate comment. Another use for emoticons is getting across ideas and feelings that are difficult to express in text because they use paralanguage which can't be conveyed in words. The guys here, for example, are either expressing how you feel, as in hell yeah, or how much you've enjoyed making someone else look like a fool. Ahmadinejad is pretty self-explanatory. The look on his face, that's not half bad, carries a certain connotation that cannot be conveyed in text alone. The look on Basil's face from The Great Mouse Detective conveys a certain amount of annoyance and lack of amusement that is almost impossible to express in text because it depends solely on facial expressions. You can also use them for emphasis. I could just say thanks a lot, but that might not get across the level of shock or horror I'm feeling in relation to something someone else has said, quite as well as a horrified bear. Any group of people together for a sufficiently long enough time will develop a culture unique to that group. This picture, for example, comes from an Indian religious festival that involves throwing colorful sand at one another. And this applies to electronic communities just as much as it does to real life. TG is a subboard of 4chan, the image board responsible for roughly half of all internet jokes in existence, from Rickrolling to lolcats. Nevertheless, TG has its own unique culture. A giant mecha popping out of a pool, and the man with the cigar in a corner won't make much sense to you unless you know something about TG. A large portion of their jokes come from Warhammer 40,000, a tabletop role-playing game, and novels that accompany it. This particular emoticon denotes surprise. The poster was not expecting something to come from where it did. The man in the corner is a well-known character from the game, Ursardur Crete, who, to quote the TG article, has woven his very essence into TG through the tactical skills he possesses. TG is now clearly known to stand for tactical genius, and not traditional games as many had previously thought. Only a tactical genius could accomplish this. This second example comes from the webcomic Perry Bible Fellowship, which has achieved popularity with 4chaners, being the original source of more than a few memes. Scub is one of them. The comic shows pro-Scub and anti-Scub characters getting into a fistfight over the substance, and it's never explained why Scub causes such things. Thus, Scub has become synonymous with things that cause unnecessary rage. For instance, Warhammer 40,000 and War Machine, another popular role-playing game on TG, are often referred to as Scub Hammer and Scub Machine because they are a source of tension and discussions about them tend to devolve into flame wars. Posting this in a thread indicates the poster's expectation of stupidity to follow based on something that no one can justify fighting over. These emoticons indicate the nature of the board. They like tabletop games, and one so much that the vast portion of their humor comes from it. In place of tactical genius, they easily could have used this one. Or this one. But they didn't. They chose the one that relates to their culture. In place of Scud, Nerd Rage easily could have been used. Warhammer and War Machine are sources of much rage, and the fight between Warhammer and War Machine enthusiasts is undoubtedly a nerdy thing to start a flame war over. In either case, with both Scud and Nerd Rage, the implication is that it's something extremely lame to fight over. Without a winking smiley face or other blatant display of humor, it is impossible to create a parody of fundamentalism that someone won't mistake for the real thing. Poe's Law originated on a Christian forum in August of 2005 in response to the umpteenth flame war to break out in a thread created by someone mocking creationist beliefs, and since it has become an integral part of internet communication. The reason that it is so important is because a lot of humor is indicated by paralanguage, which, as has discussed before, is not possible to indicate in text alone. So emoticons are very important in indicating a poster's intent to satirize or parody something. In September of 2008, Roger Ebert posted an article discussing creationism, featuring questions about the Earth's age, geological features such as the Grand Canyon, and the Great Flood, as quoted here. He was shocked by the absolute firestorm that resulted, and made an incredulous post explaining that he had intended it as a joke. Had he followed Poe's law from the get-go, such would not have been necessary, making it a good example of why it's a useful thing. Niilo Paasivirta is a Finnish writer who produces texts in both English and Finnish, and has the style of fundamentalist down to a T, which this quote from his USA-Finland friendship page shows. If you read the rest of his stuff, you get the idea that he's parodying people who do genuinely believe these things, but a smiley face would tip the reader off from the get-go, no matter how much of the material he or she had read. It is impossible for an act of fundamentalism to be made that someone won't mistake for a parody. Poe's corollary is the opposite of Poe's law in that it's a genuine fundamentalist belief or response, which is so absurd that it's mistaken for a joke. Rebranding something is neither new nor unusual, but PETA's Sea Kitten campaign is an exercise in absurdity. PETA has some valid concerns about overfishing, but talking about bitter, crazed, homicidal fish in a children's story is probably not the best way to go about it, or be taken seriously. But given that it's PETA, it's not a joke, and is in fact totally serious. Emoticons are an important part of internet communication, indicating intent, that's a little irony for ironic posts, feelings, and intensities thereof. Culture is communicated through them, as is parody. But they're not foolproof, and the user can still be misunderstood. So use them, but be aware.